Hi, my name is Alex Wilson, and for my senior seminar topic, I decided to look at coral reefs and how they are being negatively affected by bleaching events and how humans are making the problem worse. The thesis that I was able to come up with is in order for the coral reefs to be saved, as well as the human populations in which are dependent upon these reefs, carbon dioxide emissions need to be drastically reduced. I thought it was very important to include in my thesis not just why coral reefs need to be saved, but humans benefit immensely from coral reefs. So without the coral reefs, human populations all around the world are going to be hurting in numerous ways that I'll talk about later on. But carbon dioxide emissions are the main cause of coral bleaching. It's like the starting point of the whole process. Picking coral reefs was kind of a no-brainer for me, mainly because I have done numerous projects throughout college involving coral reefs and bleaching events. So I thought that I had a good handle on the topic already, but I also knew there was a lot more for me to learn. Also, I'm very passionate about the ocean. I just feel a connection to it, and knowing that it's essentially hurting makes me upset, and I want to research more ways that humans can help the coral reefs thrive, how we can stop bleaching. I also wanted to learn more about bleaching events and how it negatively impacts not only the coral reefs themselves, but also the populations that rely on the coral reefs too. They also provide huge ecosystem services like tourism, food because of fishing, and it's basically a livelihood for a lot of people. So I wanted to look how these other countries would also be struggling without the reefs. How coral reefs relate to geography is an important topic to discuss. As we all know, geography is all about spatial components and how the different systems in the world interact with one another. The first geographic standard that I thought pertained to coral reefs is how physical systems affect human systems. So when coral reefs in the physical system is degraded or dead, it negatively affects the human systems. So like the economy, tourism, fishing, etc. Another important geographic standard is how to use maps and spatial thinking to understand and communicate information. Maps are a great way to spatially show where something is. So coral reefs are all around the world, so it's good to see visually where they are in regards to other countries. And then from there, you can see which countries may depend on reefs heavily. How human actions modify the physical environment. So when the carbon dioxide is emitted from our cars and emitted into the atmosphere, which in turn ends up in our oceans, is how it negatively affects the physical environment of the coral reefs, so the bleaching events. Lastly, how to apply geography to interpret the present and plan for the future. This one's all about how we have to learn from our mistakes with what we're doing with emitting large amounts of carbon dioxide and hurting the reefs in that regard. So we should plan on how to reduce those emissions so that we don't make the same mistakes in the future. It's important to understand what coral actually is and what makes up coral. So they're living, breathing, sedentary animals that grow in colonies where individual polyps and single-celled algae make up the composition of their structure. So basically, it's a whole bunch of little things that make up a bigger thing. Even though coral reefs only make up 1% of the population on Earth, it's actually home to 3/4 of all species. So clearly, it's very important to the ocean. It can kind of compare it to the rainforest, how rainforest holds most of the diverse species on Earth on land. So what bleaching is, the phenomena that I've been talking about, is the whitening of diverse invertebrate taxa results from the loss of symbiotic zooxanthellae and or a reduction in photosynthetic pigment concentrations in zooxanthellae residing within corals. So this is a fancy way of basically saying when the reefs are under stress, specifically thermal heat stress, they lose their color. And you can actually see in this picture here, this is what bleached dead coral looks like. It's like that ghostly white color. What I found from my research was that the bleaching events usually happen during El Nino or La Nina weather patterns because the water temperature in the ocean tends to fluctuate the most during that period of time, and it usually increases. So that is why the bleaching happens then. Some more information regarding bleaching events is that they're happening more frequently than what they used to. They used to happen every 25 to 30 years, and now they're happening every 6 years. So because of the bleaching events happening more frequently, the reefs cannot heal fast enough in that time frame in between each bleaching event, because they used to be able to rejuvenate themselves and heal if they were damaged by the bleaching events. But now there's not enough time because it can actually take coral up to 10 years to heal from bleaching events. So this of course results in more dead coral. This picture over here shows pretty vibrant coral, so it indicates that it's healthy, and the picture next to it shows the ghostly white color, which means it's bleached and or dead. So this all started because of the Anthropocene period, which started during the Industrial Revolution. So the Anthropocene period is the time of increasing human activity. So factories and cars came into the picture, and more carbon dioxide was being emitted into the atmosphere. And with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere correlates the intensity of the bleaching phenomena. So when there's more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the bleaching events tend to be more intense. So when carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere from cars, factories, etc., the ocean absorbs it, which increases the surface temperature. And that puts stress on the corals, which is when it leads to bleaching, because when they bleach, it's actually a stress response. Coral reefs provide numerous ecosystem services. The biggest one is tourism, which accounts for $36 billion per year for all of the countries around the world that rely on the coral reefs. So for example, Australia, Mexico, even Florida, Hawaii, all rely on tourism from the coral reefs. Another ecosystem service is fishing, because the fishing provides jobs and food. 16.7% of the world's animal protein consumption comes from fish. And an example of how people are affected by the degradation of the coral reefs is in Indonesia. Indonesian people heavily rely on the coral reefs to get their food, their fish from. So when there was no more fish at the coral reef, the families had to alter their diets completely. And there was kind of an income shock as well, because they lost out on a lot of money without the fish. And one of the other important ecosystem services the coral reefs provide is coastal protection. So the reefs act as a barrier to coastal areas from waves. So all the houses along the coast really need the reefs so that when there's large waves, it prevents flooding. Because the reefs actually dissipate 97% of wave energy, which is a really large portion. So this picture over here just is a diagram to show you what happens when there's healthy coral and when there's degraded coral. So when there's degraded coral, you can see how it's like shrunken,
and the waves are more powerful and can actually come up closer to the coast. For my primary research, I created a series of 10 questions that pertained to the coral reefs and the degradation of them. I posted it on SurveyMonkey, which I thought was the easiest way to do it, and I sent out a link on Facebook, texted family, friends, and colleagues. My hypothesis is if people are not personally affected by coral reef degradation, then they are less likely to realize the consequences of man's actions on the reefs. So all the questions that I came up with were geared towards how familiar people are with the reefs, connection to the environment, and policy changes, and as well as education. As for secondary research, I relied heavily on scholarly articles because they're the most credible ones. I found most of my articles on Rowan's library database because it was easy to narrow my search results. I did get some news articles because I felt like it showed how the outside world is talking about bleaching and coral reefs. And majority of the articles referenced other scientists as well, which is why I felt they were still okay to use because they were still citing another scientist who had done work on coral reefs. I stayed clear of opinionated pieces because I wanted my research to be as objective as possible. I felt like the results of my primary research turned out to be pretty good. I had 26 responses total from posting it on Facebook and the text message links and everything else. So this is just some of the results that I had from my 10 responses. I didn't want to put too many graphs on the PowerPoint because I thought that would be too much. But 61% of the respondents said that they were somewhat familiar of the purpose of coral reefs, which I thought was a high number. 50% were neutral on their connection to the ocean. I felt like if more people felt more connected to the ocean, then they would want to help it more. So that's where I was trying to get at with that one. 62% believed the reefs should have funding in regards to conservation efforts, and 80% felt coral reefs should be conserved. So those countries that have coral reefs should be in charge of protecting them. I was pretty shocked that 73% of the people said that CO2 emissions should be reduced to save reefs. I thought the number wouldn't be as high, actually. 70% said they learned a little about reefs in a school setting. 73% were not aware that CO2 is the cause of bleaching, which I thought it was weird that 73% also said that the emissions should be reduced. So that's a weird correlation. 46% had no opinion as to if tourism should be cut, because some people believe that to help the coral reefs, that tourism shouldn't be allowed. So what I gathered from these results is that if individuals are not personally affected by the degradation of coral reefs or feel no connection to them, then these individuals will be less likely to support conservation efforts, funding, and emission reductions. All in all, education is key. In conclusion, carbon emissions need to be reduced in order to save the coral reefs. This can be done in numerous ways. Large companies should be held responsible for the amount of pollutants they emit into the atmosphere. So they should be given a maximum amount they are allowed to emit each month, and if they go over, they should be fined. And with the revenue from fines can go to conservation efforts, including coral reefs. Another one is that electric cars can be pushed. Maybe if car dealerships sell a certain number of electric cars, they can get a tax break or something of that sort. And the electric car should be made more affordable so that everyone can afford one. But most importantly, it's important for everyone to be an advocate, because that's what the coral reefs need at this moment, because they cannot stand up for themselves. And it would be a shame to lose something so beautiful and something that we really, as humans, heavily depend on and will suffer without. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.